I'll tell you guys what, I was starting to get a little nervous, but we are back on track, baby. What a session.
Let's rewind a second. That's me, Marc Goone, and this is the face of a boy who is on pace to do something no one thought was possible. That's right, I'm trying to make $100 an hour playing low-stakes poker, and I'm starting to think I might just have a shot. In this episode, I play 2 sessions at Hustler Casino and fight and claw my way back from the abyss to having an absolute monster session. Can I get back on track to winning $100 an hour at low stakes? Let's find out.
Down bad, bounce back, boy, I'm different. Watch how I handle my business. Watch with the hands not ticking. Listen, that's that drum kick, boom, coming out of my system.
All right, jumping into the first hand of the session, we got in for $1,000, playing 5-5 here, and we look down at pocket Kiglies in the low jack, open to $25. Only the big blind's going to call, heads up to a flop. 7-5-5 rainbow when he checks it over. My MO, single raise pots, heads up in position, going to bet. Usually the size where they raise off the strong stuff, call with the weak stuff, going to be about 1/2 pot. So I go 25, he quickly puts in the call. Turn is in 8 now. And when he checks it over, he's going to have a ton of inelastic hands here. Hands like 6-7, hands like pocket 9s, hands like 8-9 suited. Just think he's going to have a lot of hands that really are going to have a hard time folding here, even for a big size. So I go 125 into 100 here, an overbet, and he calls. River is now a 10, and at this point, we're still targeting that 7x, 8x, pocket 9 type stuff. All that stuff has been downgraded here. If I was bluffing on this river, I may go around pot, maybe a small overbet. So I would like to get called here. So I'm going to have to size down. I go 200 here, just trying to target that 7x, 8x type holdings. He puts in a call, and we are good. Nice start to the session. Next hand here, low jack makes it 25, the hijack and the cutoff call, and the button, a player who is playing for profit, squeezes to $120. We look down at pocket queens in the small blind, going to be playing a 4-bet or fold strategy here. Not really a fan of cold calling 3-bets. I'm either going to be putting in a 4-bet or folding here. Pocket queens, good enough to 4-bet, so I 4-bet to 300 here. We start off about 1.1k effective, and just don't want to go over that magical threshold where I am committed if he does decide to 5-bet jam. So I go 300, folds all the way around back to the button, and he is going to call, heads up to a flop, which comes deuce jack 7. Pot is 660. Going to start off with about a quarter pot size c-bet here. I want to make sure hands like ace king, ace queen suited with a backdoor stick around, because besides pocket 10s, those are pretty much the only hands we are beating right now. So don't want to go so big that we just get value owned all the time here. So we go 150. The button is going to put in a call. Turn is now an ace of clubs, which is pretty much the worst card in the deck. Actually, when playing against thinking players in 4-bet pots, I like to play my range the exact same on flops and turns, and then start splitting on the river depending upon what my hand wants to do. So I am going to check here. Button says all in very softly, and at this point there's just no bluffs. And the thing is, in 4-bet pots, like, you would have to be turning hands like pocket 10s or pocket 9s into bluffs all the time here, because that is the stone bottom of his range at this point. At low stakes poker, I don't think people really just understand that pocket 10s, pocket 9s, those type of holdings just need to be turned into bluffs here. So I think it's just massively under bluff. I think it's just going to be strong hands all the time. So we unfortunately are just going to have to find a fold here. Next hand, under the gun makes it 25, EP calls, and we are on the button with a suited Broadway, queen jack of hearts. We're going to squeeze to $110 with the dead money out there. I like to squeeze just linear, all my good hands, because once a pot goes open and then a call, you're much more likely to see a flop. So you just want to be able to outhand people. Under the gun is going to call, and the EP player is going to call as well. So we're going 3 ways. Flop comes king 5-4 with a couple hearts. So we flop a queen high flush draw, and now under the gun donks for 140, and EP snap folds. And when players donk in a 3-bet pot, going to be much stronger than when they donk in a single raise pot. When they donk multi-way, going to be much stronger than when they donk heads up. So this is just going to be like strong but vulnerable value here. When he chooses the size, I just don't think he has a hand like ace king. I think it's just going to be a lot of like king queen suited, king jack, king 10 suited, stuff like that. We've only got like $450, $500 left behind, and I just don't think we're going to have fold equity here. If we call, we're not going to have enough to get him to fold. So I decide just to jam, to put in the money to try to maximize fold equity. Right now we jam all in for 715 effective, but under the gun unfortunately calls very quickly. We're going to need some help. Turn is a king of clubs. That isn't going to help. Help us, dealer, please. River is an ace, and he flips over king queen of spades. So he does have what we thought, but by by the speed of which that he snapped that off, I don't think we really had any fold equity there. So maybe the move here is just calling the flop and then folding the turn, but you know, process over results, going to take this into account, but I just thought like we could get the King X to fold for all of the money here on the flop, maybe some of the time. All right, next hand here, we've got the old Queen 8 of clubs, and we open to $25 hairs from early position. Cutoff and big blind call. We're 3 ways to a flop. Queen 10-7 with a couple of hearts, and 1 player in position, 1 player out of position. I would be betting maybe some here, not expecting this flop to get stabbed. If we did have a hand like, say, King Queen or Ace Queen here, I would just be betting a good amount. But I think Queen 8, maybe just not quite strong enough. Probably a hand we want to play for 2 streets. Maybe give the cutoff a little bit of rope here to bluff on a wet dynamic board. So we are going to check. Cutoff goes $40. Big blind folds, and we have a pretty clear call here. Our hand not strong enough to raise and way too strong to fold. So we are going to call. Heads up to a turn, which comes to Queen of Spades. Pretty good. We check, and he quickly checks it back. Now the river is a deuce. If he had a very strong hand, he would probably just keep betting on the turn, unless he did have like a full house. Maybe he would check that back sometimes. But if he did have a set, that would probably just bet the flop a lot bigger. If he had a queen, he would just keep betting on the turn, being scared of the flush draws and straight draws. So I think we've got the best hand here all the time. But if he had a draw, I also think he would just keep barreling on the turn. So I think he's just going to be very, very showdown heavy here. I think he's just going to have a lot of 10x type holdings, maybe like pocket 9, stuff like that. And this seems like a pretty bad spot to bluff. Everything bricks. If I got to this river and I was trying to bluff, I may just be trying to get like King Jack or like Ace High draws to fold here if I had a hand like 8-9, right? I would not be wanting to go big if I had a bluff here, because I think we're just going to get snapped off by like Ace 10 or something like that all the time on this paired board when all the draws brick. So I'm going to go very, very big here for value. It's not about the strength of my hand. It's just knowing that our opponent's going to be inelastic here. So I go 200 into 155 here. Cutoff is going to think for a while, and finally he is going to flick in a call. We show our Queen 8, and we are good. Next hand, we open into hijacks $25 with Ace 3 of diamonds. The hijack 3 bets to 75. And I think we have a pretty standard call. We are about 1.2K deep with this player, so relatively deep. Not going to 4-bet hands like this. When I'm thinking about 4-betting from out of position, I want to 4-bet hands that can outhand my opponents. When somebody 3-bets, especially in live poker when deep, they're just going to be calling quite a lot when you 4-bet when they are in position. So we are going to call. Flop comes King Jack 9 with a couple of diamonds. So we flop the nut flush draw. We check it over. He goes 125 into 155. He is not messing around with this bet, and this is how players just telegraph their hand strength here. And we don't have any fold equity here. I think raising would be a punt. He's just telling us, hey, I've got ace king, aces, maybe a straight or a set or 2 pair. Like the worst hand he has here is ace king, right? So we are going to put in the call. Turn is a jack of diamonds. I actually think I should have taken a second and maybe considered donking here, because I'm just not sure a hand like ace king or aces or a straight. Those hands, obviously they aren't folding for 1 bet, but they're all just going to check back. So I get a little bit lazy and I check, and he checks it back. River's now a jack, so now we lose to any pair. We check, and he quickly checks it back, and he shows pocket 9. So he actually flopped a set, turned a full house and checked it back. And then on the river, he kind of gets counterfeit. So we lose the absolute minimum here. We get pretty lucky actually that I didn't donk the turn. But I think if I was thinking a little bit more clear in game, again, process over results, I kind of just like donking turn, knowing that he has a very strong range on the flop, and he's going to have a hard time folding all of his worst value if we start just putting in more money on a turn and then on clean rivers. Next hand here, big pot alert. We open to 25 in the cutoff with 8-6 of clubs, and the big blind is going to call. We're heads up, Queen 10 deuce. And he checks it over, just going to go half pot here, the size where they raise off the strong stuff, call with their weak stuff. You guys know it. He calls, and the turn is a jack of clubs. So not only do we pick up a backdoor flush draw, but the most feared hand in poker, ace king, gets there. I think this is a really good spot to barrel, and barrel big, because players are just going to be absolutely terrified here. Even with hands as strong as like 2 pair, they're just going to have a really tough time holding on when we start off this hand deep, when we start applying a ton of pressure. And this is a spot where we just get a lot of folds, or so I think. We go 150 into 100, 1.5x here on this turn. He puts in the call. River is a deuce of spades, so we don't get there. But I just think he's going to have a really, really hard time hanging on. Now his 2 pair has even been downgraded. Like he loses to even like hands like aces now. So even if he has a hand like queen jack or 10 jack or something like that, just going to be so hard to hang on this river. So he checks. We jam for 775 into 400. Now at this point, I start talking.
If you would have told me, I would have told you, I promise. Now it's too late.
And he actually puts in the call with ace jack. I'm actually a little bit flummoxed here. I've played a little bit with this player and gotten the best of him a little bit. Maybe he was just tired of what he perceived to be getting pushed around a little bit. Maybe he watched a couple of YouTube videos. I don't really know, but I am super surprised by the light call. So just gonna take this into account and calibrate a little bit differently against this particular player. Maybe a couple things that could be going on here. Number one, the front door flush draw misses, backdoor flush draw misses, and the board pairs on the river. Players do get stickier when the board pairs because sometimes they think, oh, I wouldn't jam here with ace king because the board paired, so I'm worried about full houses. So if he's not jamming with ace king, well, maybe I'm just only worried about a full house, you know? So maybe they start having some of those thoughts. I'm not really sure what this guy was thinking, but I do know this is really, really sticky, obviously, to call with ace jack here. So my adjustments are just going to be to absolutely punish the guy with very, very thin value for huge, huge, huge overbet sizes when we do play pots in the future. Next hand, and this one is interesting because I'm looking at this player. He just sat down at the table. I know this guy. He was in one of the Hungry Horse Poker boot camps, but there's no way. Why? That guy wouldn't be in LA. And he hasn't said anything to me. He hasn't acknowledged me. So I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe it just looks like him. I'm not really sure. He opens in the low jack to 20, and we've got king 10 off on the button. A bit of a light call, but we are deep. We are going heads up to a flop. Queen 9 6. He checks, which is peculiar. The Hungry Horse strategy. Is he checking, or is this guy just a recreational player and he's weak here? I'm not actually sure yet. So he checks. I go 25 here with a gutter, and he puts in the call. Turn is a deuce, and he checks it over again. At this point, I want to apply a ton of pressure to hands like 10s, jacks, 9x, pocket 8s. I think those hands, specifically hands like jacks and 10s, are probably just going to call another bet no matter how big the size is. And also, if he does have a hand like queen 10 suited, queen jack suited, stuff like that, that's just never folding. So I'm actually gonna go big here on the turn to target all that stuff and hopefully get it cleared out on the river. So I go 135 and a 95 overbet on this turn, and he puts in the call. River now an 8 of hearts. Actually a pretty good card for me because the most obvious draw in jack 10 gets there. So I think he's gonna have a really hard time hanging on this river with most of his range because it just looks like it's hard for us to be bluffing here on this river. So he checks it over, and I just want to be efficient here because I'm assuming like maybe if this guy is who I think he is, he can have jack 10 himself sometimes. Maybe he can have an overpair sometimes. Maybe he can have ace queen sometimes. I think if I did have a straight on this river, I would just go absolutely massive, just targeting hands like overpairs or ace queen or something like that. Need to be a little bit efficient with our bluff sizing here when we can run into a brick wall. We can run into some strong hands here that just aren't folding for any size sometimes. So I go 425 into 365, just targeting the weaker queen X portion of his range. He tanks and tanks and tanks and finally calls, and he has ace queen. So weren't expecting that one to fold, but he played this perfectly. He owned us in this hand. And actually after the hand, we make eye contact and he kind of smiles and we acknowledge each other, and yep, it was exactly who I thought it was. That's why you should sign up for Hungry Horse, guys, just so you can absolutely own me in hands. All right, next hand here. My favorite line in all of live poker. Need to get a graphic or something made for this. Need something special for this one. So low jack makes it 20. We're in the cutoff with pocket 9s. We are going to isolate, try to play pot heads up in position. So we go $60, and the low jack, the original opener, is going to call. Flop comes 5-4-3. He checks it over, and actually size up here bigger than I would normally go in a 3-bet pot. I go 60. I think this is even a mistake. I think I should just be going much bigger. When he opens from the low jack relatively early position, this board, he's just never really going to hit this board in a 3-bet pot. He's just gonna have a ton of hands that are inelastic here. So I think I should just be potting this, or at least going much bigger than 60. But anyway, I go 60, he calls. Turn is a king of hearts, and when he checks it over, we just have like thin value at this point. So I'm gonna play my favorite line in all of live poker, which is c-bet flop, check back turn, bluff catch river. You guys know what's coming. River is an offsuit ace. He comes out and bets 115. Even when we check back the turn, they still just put us on a hand like ace king, and they play those top pair ace-x hands passively, particularly in 3-bet pots. And also the sizing, when they choose this half pot size or under half pot size on the river, it is just frequently going to be a bluff. Because what happens when you 3-bet? They call too much. What happens when you c-bet on the flop? Well, they just call too much of their weak stuff, raise too much of their strong stuff, turn goes check check, and they just get to the river with too wide and weak of a range. And when they have a wide and weak range with all of their bluffs and air, they generally tend to bet small, and they get greedy. They get very greedy when they do have good hands after the turn goes check, check. So he bets 115. We put in the call, and we are good versus pocket 6s.
All right, we're here with Henry Fisher. Henry is one of the best rigs in LA, one of the biggest winners at 5-5. So I want to ask him, Henry, do you think $100 an hour is possible at 5-5?
Se tu jogar nos horários corretos, é bem possível. E dependendo de quantas horas tu fizer no mês, eu acho que é possível, né? Agora, se tu fizer grinds de 10 horas por dia, eu acho que é um pouco mais improvável, mas um grind um pouco menor, existe essa possibilidade sim de fazer $100 por hora, tu tendo bastante conhecimento do jogo, muito estudo e tu sendo regular há bastante tempo, né? Não é para novatos.
Chupa, Gordal.
Chupar. Thank you.
Next hand here, massive exploit zone. We open early position, 10-8 of clubs to 25. The cutoff's going to call. We're heads up to a flop. Flop comes ace-king-5 with a couple of spades. Just going to be checking my entire range here. Out of position, heads up in a single raise pot. I check, he checks it back. Turn is now a 4. At this point, I think the natural inclination is just to come out and bet ourselves. We've got nothing. We've got air here. Flop went check, check. He just showed passivity. Didn't really show much interest in his board. But I do think players can still have some ace-x. But they're just never going to have hands like good top pair, 2-pair sets. That stuff still always gets bet. Now he goes 35. The bullshit's gonna fold if we breathe on the pot, but we'd like to make the ace-x play for all the money, which it will not want to do. So we're gonna put in the big boy check raise, planning to just jam a lot of rivers. We go 220 here with air, which is 10 high, and he snap folds. And this is one of my favorite lines, guys. This one, you may see some punts from me now and again, but this one just works at a very, very high frequency. And the ace high boards, when the flop goes check, check, just going for the check raise on the turn, whether there's an ace on the flop or whether an ace comes in on the turn, it just works at such a high frequency. And you guys may see some of these hands like, oh my God, Mark, you're just absolutely punting off here. You're just giving it away. But there's all these little tiny small pots that I win over and over and over and over again, just printing the red line. And I only show some of these, but if you guys just fight for every single pot, yeah, you'll get blown up. It'll blow up in your face once in a while, right? But you will just print so much more money overall long term by winning so many more of these small to medium pots. All right, next hand, just paying attention to sizing tails. These are so important. Straddle's on. So we're playing 5-5-10. We open to 40 on the button with pocket 9. Small blind 3-bets to 150. This is just going to be massively under 3-bet. People aren't 3-betting their small blind nearly enough versus a late position open. Now the straddle's going to cold call. Our hand not good enough to 4-bet versus a very strong range, but we're going to be in position. We've got relative position and absolute position. And what I mean by relative position is the small blind is going to be first to act, and he is the pre-flop aggressor. So we're going to see what he does, and then we're also going to see what the straddle does after the small blind acts. So not only do we get to act last absolute wise because we're on the button, we get to act last relative wise because the pre-flop raiser is going to be first to act post. So we are going to call. Flop comes 7-3 deuce, so we still have an overpair. Now surprisingly the small blind checks and the straddle goes 255, right? This is just a big bet for the game. Yeah, it's only 60% pot, but first of all, 60% pot in a 3-bet pot multi-way with the straddle on, right? This is a big monster bet. And what do players have when they cold call 3-bets? Well, usually hands like 10s, jacks, queens, suited broadways, ace king. Ace king and suited broadways aren't taking this size. So what does he have? We're just always beat here, guys. So we just fold the pocket 9s, and now the small blind is going to check raise to 510. The straddle tanks and tanks and tanks, and he eventually folds. Just goes to show, like, pay attention to these sizing tells, right? Pay attention to the sizing tells. It will save you a lot of money in the long run. Next hand here against the same Hungry Horse Bootcamp alum that owned us before. We're going to try to get some revenge. The straddle's on, so we're playing 5-5-10. We open 240 in the hijack with ace, jack offsuit. And the button, former Bootcamp alum, is going to call. Flop comes 10-8-5. I think on these lower dynamic boards, just from a theory perspective, when deep, checking our entire range as an early position opener versus a button flatter in a single raise pot, just going to be pretty good and make us harder to play against. So we are going to check here. He checks it back. Turn is a queen of hearts now. And at this point, we've got a double gut shot here. I think he's got a lot of showdown value, particularly when he checks back the flop. I think if we just go bet, he's just gonna go call a lot. So I'm gonna check again and try to set the trap, try to get him to bet with his thin value here now, and then just pounce and go for the big check raise and make him play for all the money. But he checks it back. He does not take the bait. Now the river is a king of spades, and we make these stone cold nuts. And now I think on this river, he's either got a hand like pocket 9s or pocket 7s that is not putting in any more money no matter what. He's just got showdown value, and it's just gonna go check, or I do think he could have some sneaky 2 pair pair here on this river, I think he's going to protect his check back range against a player he perceives to be a spaz, which is me here. So I think he does have some hands like King 10, maybe some hands like King Queen. That makes some sense. So we're gonna get greedy here. I go 300, 3x pot on this river into 95. Would not do this against a typical player, but doing this because he's a thinking player, and I do think he protected his check back range on the flop, and I do think he can have some strong hands here, so he's gonna think it over. Finally, he's gonna flick in the call we show, and he flashes Ace King, which I am not surprised that he ends up here with Ace King. Actually like the flat pre-flop with Ace King. When a strong player opens, he's flatting with Ace King on the button to let the two recreational players in the blinds who are going to make 100+ big blind mistakes post-flop. He knows I'm probably not going to make a ton of mistakes post-flop compared to the two guys in the blind, so let's call it even. We are even on the day. All right, next hand here. Straddle is on the hijack and cutoff limp. We ISO on the button with King Jack offsuit 260. Small blind calls, now the two limpers call as well. 4 ways to the flop. King Jack 4 with a couple of spades. Pretty good for us. We flop top 2. Checks all the way around to us. We go 100. And it folds back around to the cutoff, who's going to call. Turn is now an ace of diamonds, and he checks it over. And this player, I've seen him open a lot of his suited aces, especially from later position, even over limps. So the one hand we will be targeting here on this turn for value would be a hand like ace X of spades. Because he limped pre-flop, I just don't think he has that. I think he's just going to have a lot of hands like Jack X, or maybe like weak King X type holdings here. So I actually elect to check this back. Now the river is a 6 of spades, and like I said, not really worried about the spades coming in, but he checks it over. If he flipped over a hand like King 9 suited or something, I could probably just go like 300 or maybe 250 on this river and get the King 9 suited to fold. So I'm gonna go relatively small on this river, trying to entice the King X to call. I bet 200, and then I start talking.
What do you have? A king? Just a king? That would be quite the hero call.
Maybe just a king.
Yeah, that would be quite the hero call. I don't think you should call with that. But if you have something better, maybe you should think about it. But that hand, I don't know.
I don't know. You like got called in the flop.
Yeah.
You check the turn.
Yeah.
Call, I'd raise him.
And then you bet the river.
Hey, you're not in this hand, sir.
I have to listen to you guys, so I'm in it.
Well, we're in the hand. Don't influence the action.
You could have a crush. You could have like an underpair of like tens.
I mean, the possibilities are really endless here.
Now I'm just kind of curious about what you have.
You're making me nervous. You're making me really nervous. I think you should make a decision.
Okay, I'm gonna go. King Jack, yep, secure. I see.
Next hand here, big pot alert. Against the very same villain, Straddle is still on. We got Ace King this time from under the gun. We make it $40. The cutoff calls, and now this Straddle, the same villain from the last hand, squeezes to 210. Out of position. Straddle is on, squeezing, closing the action. This is just massively under 3-bet, and I think my 4-bet range here might just be aces and kings. And the reason why I am unbalanced is because they are unbalanced. I am going to call here. The cutoff comes along as well, King 7-5. So we flop top pair, and actually the Straddle checks, and we want to choose a size where he's going to continue with jacks and queens. So we go small here, we go 200, cutoff gets out of the way, Straddle calls. Turn is now a king, and now surprisingly he donks for 350 into 1,035. Feels a lot to me like a hand like queens or jacks. It's just trying to set its own price. So if we raise here, I think those hands would just fold a lot. And after he puts in a 350, he's only got about 1,100 or so behind maybe. So if we call here, pot's gonna be 1,735 going to the river. So no real reason to raise. We call. River is now a 9, and now he donks again for 475. Again, he's only got about 600 back now. So we put the money in. Gonna be real hard for him getting his price to even fold a hand like queens or jacks. And he actually does end up making a pretty good fold here. He does just have queens here at a pretty high frequency. Next hand against the same villain again. So back to back to back. This time he makes it 35 in the low jack. We 3-bet in the hijack with 6-5 of spades to $110, just trying to isolate, play pots heads up. Don't really want to go multi-way and play bingo with this one. So he is going to call. Flop comes queen jack 8 with a couple spades. So we flop a flush draw. He checks it over, just going to range bet 1/3. He calls. Turn is now a 9. 9. And now, interestingly, he donks again. We've seen before when he donks, it's not going to be necessarily very strong hands, particularly on turns. Just think he may get a little bit more trappy with a 10. Now, he could have a 10 sometimes, but I think this player does float flops relatively wide. To me, this is just going to be maybe hands like ace X of diamonds, like draws or something like that. Maybe even spade draws here that are now trying to donk on the turn to get me to fold. So like spade draws, diamond draws, stuff like that. That's what this feels like to me. Now, it could be a 10 some of the time, but I am discounting that. I am going to call here, see what happens on the river. Of course, we do still have a flush draw. River is a queen pairing the board. He checks it over, and at this point, I think the natural inclination here is to just blast, but let's think this over, right? His range is busted spade draws, busted diamond draws, and maybe some 10x. He's not gonna play queen X this way. That doesn't make sense for him to donk the turn. If we had value in this spot, if we say had a full house, we have pocket jacks here, right? What size would we bet? Well, I think we would just bet very, very big here because we would just be targeting the rare 10x. I don't think 10x is ever folding. We may just jam here, right? We may just jam. We may just put the money in here against him and just think 10x is never folding. So if we are value betting, we would just go very big. And some people are like, well, Mark, when you're bluffing, you always go big. That's not true. I don't just always just go big when I have bluffs. In this particular spot, if I had value, I would go absolutely huge. I actually think in this spot, with a bluff, we should go very, very small. All we really need to do is get his ace high, king high, whatever, spade and diamond draws to fold, and we are absolutely printing. So I'm gonna go very small in this river. I go 175 into 795, just trying to get his draws to fold, expecting 10x is never gonna fold when he does have 10x, and he actually lays it down. So I'm pretty happy with my thought process in this one. Happy I found this in game, the small bluff on the river, just to fold out the better draws. Next hand, this is gonna be the last one of the session. EP limps, we ISO to 35 in the low jack with ace jack. Cutoff and button call, and now the EP limper comes along as well. Flop comes king, queen 10 with 3 diamonds, and it checks over to us. And with multiple players in position to us here, I'm actually just going to check and see what happens with 2 guys in position. We don't necessarily have a hand that is just comfortable piling in all the money over 3 streets. So we're gonna check. The button goes 50, really, really small here, and EP calls. I think our hand could check raise, maybe a bit on the thin size, particularly when EP calls next to act. I think we're just gonna be ahead of the button a lot of the time, but we're going to call here, see what happens on the turn. Cutoff calls as well. So we're still 4 ways to the turn, which is a 6 of clubs. And now at this point, it checks through. Now I'm pretty confident we've got the best hand between the button and the cutoff almost all of the time here. And maybe the EP player could still have a flush sometimes, but we're gonna see what he does on the river. Now when he checks, I'm just 97% sure we've got the best hand here. I do think somebody's got something here. Like somebody has 2 pair, like a queen 10 or king 10 or something like that. Somebody at least has a king. So I do think we get some nice thick value here on this river. So I go 300 into 345. The cutoff is going to call, the button folds, and now the EP actually overcalls. So this is amazing. We're just gonna get absolutely massively paid here. I immediately flip over the cards and this happens.
Straight.
I'm chicken shit, people. What is that?
So we actually get slow rolled here by the cutoff, who has 9-6 of diamonds. I mean, some people get upset at this. I actually feel my frustration starting to raise a bit, which is how I know it's time to go home, because he doesn't mean to slow roll. He honestly just doesn't know better. Like that's all it is. There's no malicious intent behind it. It is time to leave the casino. I've had enough casino people for the day. It's time to go home. We're gonna wrap up this session. All right, guys, so it is the next day after last night's session, and just when I thought I had it in the bag, get hit with a wallop of variance. I like the word wallop. Played about 11 hours, down about $1,600, and now at this point, we're at $99.74 per hour, so just under where we need to be. So it's gonna be it's gonna come down to the wire, guys. Going to need to start running decent again, and gonna need people to stop calling light when we bluff. Just got hero called a few times by hands that made me go, what the hell is going on? So on the way back into Hustler right now, gonna stop and grab some gas, and then gonna try to turn this thing around and get back over $100 an hour. See you guys on the other side. All right, rolling into our second session of the week here at Hustler. For the first significant hand of the session, we got King Deuce of Clubs in the hijack. I'm chatty as usual. The casino hasn't brought me down today yet.
What is this hand? This is a good hand. $40.
$40.
Punish me, sweetie. What do you have?
Straddle's on. We raise to $40. The cutoff, small blind, and straddle all call. So 4 ways to a flop. Jack 5-3 with a couple clubs. So we flop a king high flush draw. Checks over to us. We go $50. Only one player in position, multiple players out of position. So I'm just going to be betting off my strong hands and good draws here. Not expecting this flop to get stabbed. Cutoff calls. Now the small blind raises to 250. The straddle is on. We see bet into multiple people. It's a 5x check raise size. It's just going to be sets in 2 pair, right? It's just going to be sets in 2 pair all the time. So we are going to call. We've got the king high flush draw. He's still got $600, $700 behind. We can hit the flush on the turn. Please, dealer, help us out here. Cutoff folds, heads up to a turn, which is a 9. He just moves all in, and I start talking.
I have a set, and I'm going to fold. Threes.
You have threes?
Yeah.
You're a truthful man. You're a truthful man.
Nice catch, Mike.
Get him, people. Get him.
Security, I want him thrown out. He's got
86, 24 hours.
Just by lying about my hand, get him to confirm my beliefs and show that he did indeed flop a set. So not the ideal start we wanted, but on we go. Next hand, cutoff opens to $20, and we look down to the second best hand in all of poker. Pocket aces in the big blind here. Gonna 3-bet it up, of course, but I choose a smaller size here. I only go $80. Now, if this player had opened from the low jack or early position, I'd just be going huge. I'd be going 100, 125, maybe 150, something like that here. I'd be going absolutely massive here. So I raise to 80. Cutoff calls, heads up to a flop, 5-3 deuce. We only start this hand about 150 bigs effective. So I decide to deviate here and just go bet with pocket aces. I'm not sure I love it because I do think if I check here, this flop just gets stabbed at an inordinately high amount. So I actually think going with the default here and checking is slightly better, but I do bet 100 into 160. He raises to 200. And now at this point, I think this is just going to be hands that are putting in a stop raise, hands like pocket 10s, pocket jacks, stuff like that, that just doesn't want to face 3 barrels. And it's just going to check back a lot on turns. My plan here is actually just to call this min raise and then to donk the turn. So we are going to call here. Turn is a 6. It brings in a 1-liner. So we are actually going to check here. I think we just generate too much fold equity against a hand like pocket 10s if we donk. So we check, he checks it back. River is now a deuce pairing the board. Pretty good for us. Players get sticky when the board pairs. And we jam all in for approximately 500 effective. Just think he's never folding a hand like pocket 10s here. He says it's time to go home anyways. I love when they say that. And he calls and we are good. He actually shows jack 6 suited. What? The small pre-flop size, guys. The small pre-flop size versus a late position open, just keeping in those dominated hands. Happy I found this one. Been a little bit sloppy in these last couple sessions, but happy I sometimes make the right play. And nice little pot. Next hand, big pot alert. The straddle is on. The cutoff raises to 45 and in kind of a shit spot in the big blind here with pocket 7s. I generally like to play 3-bet or fold unless I'm on the button or closing the action, but I do think players play tighter when the straddle is on, particularly when they open to a big size. 45, just a big open size for the game. Also, what we've got going for us, got kind of a more passive player on our left. This is just not going to get squeezed at a high frequency, so I do decide to deviate here. Straddle comes along, ace, king, 8, so we're just done with this, but it checks through, and the turn is the beautiful 7 of hearts. Look at that sweet baby there. Now there are front door spades, backdoor hearts out there, so we think this board is just very, very likely to get stabbed. Also, I think the cutoff could still have some ace X that may check back flop. Even when the board is wet, players do tend to check back sometimes with top pair, not strong top pair, but some top pair on these ace X boards. And do think this straddle could have quite a lot of draws here. We check, the straddle checks, and now the cutoff goes 125. It's nearly pot here into 2 other people on this turn. I think it's strong. I think he's picked up some type of combo draw, like queen 10 of hearts. Maybe he's got a hand like ace 10 of hearts that check back the flop. I just think this is very strong. He's not messing around when he bets 125 here on this turn, on this wet board. I think he's got a real hand. So we've got about 880 effective here. So kind of an awkward size. I'm not sure he's ever folding combo draws. I don't think he's obviously ever folding like ace X of hearts. So we just stick in all the money here, 880. And now surprisingly, the straddle reshoves. So we go all in, the straddle goes all in, the cutoff tanks, and now the cutoff actually folds. So we are heads up all in to the river. River is an ace of hearts And we show our hand, and he's got king 8. He actually flopped 2 pair and then had a sneaky check again on the turn. And we get it in here pretty good and win a very nice pot. Next hand, hijack just opens to $50. There's no straddle on or anything. He just decided to open to 50. And we look down at pocket queens. And this guy only started off about 500 effective. So if we were really deep, I just go absolutely massive here. Just thinking when guys open to this like 10x size, they just have hands like 10s, jacks, ace queen, ace king, right? It's just going to be that type of stuff. Usually they don't do this with aces or kings. It's just going to be kind of those like vulnerable good hands, and we are ahead of most of that range. So I 3-bet to 150. Again, if we were deeper, I just go huge, but no reason to do that. We're already putting in a third of his effective stack here. Now, surprisingly, the button is going to jam all in. He's just going to cold 4-bet jam all in for about 600, and the cutoff gets out of the way, and I ask him at this point,
You got aces or aces?
I don't have that.
Oh.
So you're lying.
Flop comes ace 10-5 with 3 diamonds. Please, dealer, bless us with a diamond. One time, bless us with a diamond. Turn is a 3 of hearts. Not gonna help. And the river is a deuce of diamonds. So we make a flush on the river, queen high flush. He shows ace king of hearts, and we are good. Next hand, this is a doozy. We see that the button is telegraphing a fold, and when we are on the button, we're just opening any 2. So I actually open 7-3 of spades here in the cutoff, just knowing that the button is about to fold. I go 25, small blind and the big blind call. So we're 3 ways to a flop. It actually comes 8, 8, 4 with a couple of spades, so not all that bad for us. We flop a flush draw. They check it over to us. I go small here, 25. Small blind calls and big blind folds. We're heads up to a turn, which is the queen of spades. Normally on these flushing turns, I like to go small to incentivize him to raise off their strong shit and call it their weak shit. But when we have a 7 high flush, we're not really concerned about him raising off his strong shit. We just want to get max value from his pretty good hands here. And when he calls next to act on the flop, I actually think he can have a lot of trips here. Players do slow play when they call next to act, right? Because they want other people to come along into the pot. That is when they slow play the most. So I do think he's going to have a lot of trips, and the trips aren't going to raise on this turn when the flush comes in, even if we go small. So I want to target those hands. So I actually overbet here, small overbet. I go 125 into 120. He calls. River is now a king. He checks, and I think if I was trying to bluff an 8 on this river, probably have to go like 450, 475, something like that. I would love for an 8 to call here. So I go 300 into 370. He puts in a quick call. So I think I could have gotten maybe a little bit greedier, maybe 350 or 400 even, but we do win a nice little chunky pot here with 3-7 of spades. All right, next hand we go 25 in the cutoff with king jack of hearts. Small blind 3-bets to 125. Gonna be a strong range, but players play face up in 3-bet pots, particularly when they are out of position. So I got a suited Broadway. I am calling. Heads up to a flop, ace 4-4. He checks it over. I don't think we need 3 streets to get a hand like kings or queens to fold. We check it back, turn a queen of hearts. So we pick up a combo draw here on the turn. He checks. And at this point, I want a hand like pocket kings to call, right? If we go too big here on the turn, what ends up happening is we just get punished by pocket aces or pocket queens that are trapping. So I want to choose a size where kings is always going to call, maybe even a hand like jacks calls one time, right? So we go 100 here into 250. He puts in a quick call. River now an offsuit 6, and he checks it over. If I had a hand like ace 10 here on this river and I was targeting pocket kings, probably go pretty small. I'd probably go like 200, 225, something like that to get kings to call. So I'm going to size up, put a little extra sauce on it, make sure kings fold. I go 375, small blind, snap folds, and we get it through. Pretty happy with how we played this one. Next hand, we've got a limped pot. So low jack limps, button limps. We check in the small blind with 6-4 offsuit, and big blind checks. We're 4 ways to a flop, 9-5 deuce. Couple of diamonds, so we flop a gutter. Checks all the way around to the button. He goes 15. Yeah, it's pot, but it's still a very small size. Absolute size matters more than relative size of the pot, so $15, still a small bet for the game. And also, he's last to act, so I think he can be a little bit wider here, can be stabbing a little bit weaker. So we are going to put in the check raise here, and you know what they say, never play for all the money in a limped pot. I think we just have a lot of fold equity here. So we go $70, and the reason why I don't go absolutely huge here is I would like him to continue with kind of a weaker range, and then we can blast that off on the turn in the river. So he is going to call heads up to a turn, which look at that sweet baby there, the 3 of hearts. We actually bink the nuts here. Now at this point, I'm just trying to get max value from 9x. I think 9x is going to have a hard time folding here on the turn when there is a flush draw out there. So I'm gonna go for the big boy chunky size. I go 200 into 155 and he calls. Now the river is a 3 of clubs. I actually really like this river because when boards pair, players just get more sticky. They just get more sticky with their made hands. So I think if I was trying to bluff on this river, I think if I was trying to bluff with a hand like a missed diamond draw and trying to get 9x to fold, oh boy, I'm just not sure 9x is folding. So I think it's a good spot to go big for value, right? So I should get a little bit greedy. I go 600 and he tanks and tanks and tanks and tanks. And unfortunately for us, he finally folds, but pretty happy with how I played this one. Maybe could have gone a little bit bigger on the turn, but I think process over results. I think my river size is going to be pretty good in a vacuum. I do think we get heroed by 9x here enough of the time to make this a decent size. Next hand, I open Jack 7 of clubs on the button and the small blind calls. We are heads up going to a flop, actually just opening blind on the button. Just opening any 2 cards when there's 2 recreational players in the blinds, and will it come back to bite me? We will see. Flop comes 9-5 deuce. Now the small blind donks for $25. When players donk, I'm just flatting with my entire range, my good stuff, my strong stuff, my weak stuff, and everything in between. We've looked at the mass data, we've looked at millions of hands from recreationals who play online at small stakes, which kind of lines up to live poker. And when players donk, they just have all types of bullshit. So we are going to call. Turn is now an 8 of spades. The flush gets there and now he checks. I really like this. I really like this because now I think we just have a ton of fold equity. So I don't think we need to cap them because they have a bet on the flop and checked on the turn. So they're probably just not gonna have a flush at a high frequency. So I go relatively big. I go 85 here. He puts in the call. Now the river is the 9 of diamonds and he checks it over. I just talked about when the board pairs on the river, we've seen a couple times, they do get a little bit more sticky, but the flush got there. He's going to have a really hard time calling on this river, and I decide just to go for it. I think even if he does have a 9, I may be able to get that to fold here. Recreational players massively overfold when the flush gets there. It's hard for me to be bluffing, right? The obvious straight draw 6-7 gets there on the turn. The obvious flush draw gets there, and so I go for the massive over bet here. I go 595 into 270, and he snap calls. He snap calls and shows pocket 7s. Occasionally I look like a big dummy. It does not work. And I think against the pool, it works enough. Against this particular player, obviously not great. Next hand, the straddle is on. We open to $40 in the low jack with ace 10 of diamonds. The button, the big blind, and the straddle call. We are 4 ways to a flop, which comes ace 10 4. Pretty good for us. It checks over to us. We've got 1 player in position and multiple players out of position. So I'm just gonna start betting here, not expecting this flop to get stabbed at high frequency. I go 60 into 160. The button clicks it to 120. And these min clicks are just going to be like top pair type hands, just trying to find out where they're at. This guy only starts this hand about 500 and some change effective. So I think if I jam here, I may just get folds from hands like ace 9 or something like that, just doing this like monkey click, trying to find out where they're at. I'm actually just gonna click it back. I go 250 and he jams all in for approximately 520, which is great. We call it off. And the turn is a king of spades. And now I say,
Oh, Sammy, don't do it.
Don't do what?
No jack, no queen.
Sammy the dealer cooperates and we win versus pocket queens. I don't know, guys. I don't know. I can't explain. I can't explain what they're doing, what's going on. But happy birthday to me. Next hand, straddle still on. Low jack goes 35. Cutoff calls, and we look at the second best hand in all of poker once again. Pocket aces. We squeeze to $140 hairs here. Low jack folds, and the cutoff double calls here. So we call the open, and now he calls the 3-bet. So this is just going to be pocket pair heavy and like suited Broadway type stuff. Usually when they go call pre-flop, flop comes ace 9-5 with 3 hearts. So we flop top set, but 3 hearts out there. He checks it over to us. Gonna go really small here, $70. He puts in the call. Turn now is a 10 of spades. He checks, gonna go really small again. Want to make sure hands like pocket 8s with a heart stick around. Just hard to get called here on this particular turn. Now surprisingly, he's going to put in the check raise to 600. I actually don't love this, but we bet small twice, just not really sure what he's turning into a bluff here. Just think this is never a bluff. It's just going to be value. The question is, when we choose a small size twice, do we beat some of his value? And I think the answer is yes. And obviously we can just boat up on the river as well if he does have a flush. So we put in the call. River is a king of clubs, and now he goes very, very small. He goes 300 into 1670. So we're getting a great price here. I don't think this is ever a bluff, but I do think we beat obviously enough of his value to make this a profitable call. So we are going to put in the call, and he says to pair. We just fast roll and show our hand, and he mucks. Last hand of the session. You guys are gonna be happy you stuck around because it is a big pot alert. So under the gun, EP, and the low jack limp. So 3 players have limped from up front, and I look down at pocket fours. I actually decide to over limp, particularly because the under the gun player is a for-profit player. And to me, this just feels a little bit fishy when he limps from under the gun. Haven't really seen this guy limp. So now the cutoff is going to ISO to 25. And just like we thought, the spidey senses were tingling. The under the gun for profit player limp raises to 135. Now the low jack puts in a cold call, and back around to us. We're going to have good position here post flop, and so I actually decide to put in the speculative call and cut off folds. So now we have absolute position post flop. Comes queen 9-4. Look at that sweet baby there, and we start this hand off deep with the under the gun player who has limp raised, and now he goes 280 into 435. He's not messing around. This is a good hand. This is just always a good hand. If I had a bluff here, I would not want to raise because I just don't think I have even a smidge of fold equity here. I have 0 fold equity. So this is just a dream scenario. We started this hand off about 1.7K effective, so don't need to go all that big to get in all the money on the turn. So I go 700 here, just targeting hands like pocket aces, pocket kings, etc. And he is going to think it over and put in a call. Going to a turn, which is the beautiful innocuous deuce of diamonds, he checks it over, and not much left here to do but jam. He's got just under $1,000 behind. So we put it all in here for just about 1,000 into 1,835. He tanks and tanks and tanks. We're just begging, please call, please call, please call. Finally, he does call, and we just fast roll. We show the set here. River is a 9. We boat up, and obviously we are good and nice to end the session on a very, very strong note. You know, I started this session off down about 2K, and I was actually thinking, you know what? I've never gone on a downswing bigger than 5K at 5.5. It's like impossible if you're making over 15 big blinds an hour. How is this gonna happen? And then I realized it's not gonna happen. Went from down 2K to up over 3K. Pretty nice swing of events there. Into the session up about 3K and some change. Played about 10 hours, just under 10 hours. And we're back on track. Played just under 150 hours at this point and making about 115 bucks an hour. So we are on pace after a nice little session, and see you guys soon.